Hi everybody, this is Peggy McGuire with English 106, Written Business Communication. Our topic today is about teams. It's about teams working together, and then specifically in a business context about teams writing together. You may well have been in other courses recently where you were asked to work with other people to produce something. And that's not an accident. And certainly in the context of business and industry, it's incredibly and increasingly important that people be able to work together effectively in teams. We learn that over and over again whenever employers are asked what they most value in employees, what they're most looking for in employees. One of the very first things they say is the ability to work effectively with others. And the reason for that, no doubt, is that these folks believe that teams of people can more efficiently complete tasks than individuals working on the same tasks. So people believe that teams mean greater productivity. And greater productivity is a bottom line for most businesses. So in order to achieve that, they want people to be able to work with other people. So we start by talking about some general guidelines about what helps teams of people work more effectively together. And then we'll look more closely at specifically what helps people working in teams to write and produce business documents more effectively. Okay? So, when you are working in a team, it is always important to pay attention to three really important components of teamwork. And for each of these components, there's a particular kind of leadership within a team that functions most effectively. So, first component, first dimension of teamwork that each individual member needs to pay attention to, and that is about information. So in other words, each member of a team must have a common understanding and a shared understanding of what is the problem we as a team need to solve. What is the question we need to answer? What is the issue that we need to take care of? Right? So we all need to have a shared understanding of what the problem is. We also then need to understand fully what information we already have to help solve the problem, to help address the issue, to help answer the question. And we all need to be a part of talking about what are some possible solutions to this problem, some possible answers to the questions, or ways to approach the issue. All right? So the first thing is every member of a team needs to have the same kind of understanding of what information we have available to us. All right? Very important. So a leader of a team would be tasked with making sure that everybody in the team has that shared information and a common understanding of the issues. Okay? The second key dimension of teamwork has to do with procedures. All right, so the first piece is about what we know. The second piece, procedures, is about how we go about doing what we need to do. So, under procedures, we all need to agree within a team about how we are going to make decisions. This is critically important, and it often gets overlooked. But every member of a team needs to have a shared agreement with each other about how we're going to make decisions within this team. Then, once we do that, we also need to each of us understand who is going to do what. Not just what I am going to do, which is critically important, but also what my other team members are going to be doing. And not only what we need to do individually and as a group, but what's our timeline? What do I need to do and when do I need to do it? When does it need to be finished? And what about the other members of my team? what are each of them doing, and what is their timeline like, so that we have a shared timeline. We understand what's going to get done and when it's going to get done and who's doing what. Okay? So again, a leader in such a group would need to make sure that everybody understands his or her role, everybody understands when things have to be done, and everybody understands how we are going to make decisions together. So my job as a leader is to make sure that everybody's on the same page when it comes to how we're going to go about our work. Right? Third, and very important to an effective group, and that is the interpersonal dimension of teamwork. People getting along with each other well enough to get the job done. So, how do we maintain a friendly working relationship? How do we make sure that everybody shows up to meetings or other events that we schedule? How do we make sure that everybody cooperates with each other? And finally, how do we make sure that everybody does what needs to be done? A leader here is critically important to make sure that if there are any interpersonal conflicts or issues, that they be brought to the surface and dealt with by the group as quickly and as effectively as possible. That it's critical that we don't ignore or try to minimize problems that come up among the people who are trying to work together in a group. So a leader needs to make sure that those things are surfaced and dealt with. Right? And that when we make decisions about troubleshooting, if you will, that everybody agrees to those decisions. And remember here that silence does not mean agreement. A very important piece of group work. If people don't say anything, you cannot assume that they know the same things that everybody else knows, or that they agree to what everybody else agrees with. So a very critical task for a leader in a group is to make sure that our interpersonal business is not getting in the way of the task that needs to be done. So, some other good ideas, just good basic ideas about promoting effective teamwork. First of all, once a team is formed, it's really important and will really help you out in the long run if you sit down first and talk about what we call ground rules for how we're going to work together. Just some things that we all will agree to and then hold ourselves accountable to. So, for instance, can we all agree that if we set a meeting for 10 a.m. that we will all be here at 10 a.m.? Can we all agree that if we have a meeting scheduled and one of us realizes that we can't make the meeting, that we will contact the other members with 24 hours notice, so that we can either reschedule the meeting or know how to proceed without the person who can't be there? These are the kinds of things I'm talking about. Coming to a set of agreements about basic, it's really basic, being polite and being professional in the team. So this may seem sort of artificial at the beginning of a process with a team, but believe me, if you do it at the beginning, later on you'll be glad you did, because you can hold each other and yourselves accountable to those rules without anybody being surprised or not knowing what they were supposed to do. So setting ground rules for how a team is going to work together really helps the team in the long run. Next thing is, for each individual within a team, it's very important to participate actively in the conversation, in the decision making, and in the work. However, it's also important not to talk too much, not to dominate the conversation, not to take up so much space that other people don't have an equal opportunity to participate. So there's a balancing act that goes on when you're working with a team and you want you think you have good ideas and you want to contribute, that's awesome. But it's also important that other people feel equally able as well as ready to participate in that way. So make space for other people, even as you take up your own space with energy and goodwill to really contribute to the group's work. If you disagree with someone, or if you think someone's idea is not the best idea, or you think someone's work needs some tweaking, it's important that you be willing and able to be critical of each other's work when that's necessary, because all of you want to produce the best final product possible, right? So in order to do that, we have to be able to be honest when we feel like a piece of it is not working very well, or needs to be revised, or needs some work. So it is, when necessary, very important that we feel permission to be critical of each other. And critical doesn't just mean criticizing people. In fact, it doesn't mean criticizing people. It means you're thinking about it and you have some suggestions for how that can be better. That's what being critical means. You've thought about it and you've come up with an idea that might help to improve the overall product. That's being critical. So do it when it's necessary, but certainly don't do it all the time. Don't become the person who's known as the group naysayer, the person who never agrees with anything, or who always says that something won't work. Don't be that person. You'll be sorry if you try to be that person. Even if you have good intentions, it's not going to help the group move forward. And, very important, if you do have a critical comment to make, try to offer a suggestion along with it. So if you say this needs some work, or this is a little weak right now, and I think what you want to do is immediately then give an idea for how to make it better. What kind of work are you talking about? What's your suggestion for how to strengthen this? So if you're making a critical comment, make sure you're also making a constructive suggestion. And hey, tell a joke now and then. Have some light, bring some lightness into the group work, but not too often and never inappropriate. And certainly never exhibiting any kind of bias. But I'm not even just talking about bias. I'm also talking about an intense work situation in which people are focused and serious, and now it's not the time to be making jokes. And you really have to trust your good sense and your gut to know when a bit of lightness needs to be thrown in there and when it's time to be serious. And part of that is that sometimes people feel like any kind of potential conflict should be addressed with a joke. Well, no. You've got to really think through what would be the repercussions if you make a joke at this point. So know when to lighten things up, but also know when to not lighten things up. Not do it too often. The group does not need an official clown. The group needs people who are sensitive to each other and aware of the purpose of working together and the work that needs to be done, and within that context can make a joke now and then. That's how you introduce humor. All right? Okay, so those are sort of like broad stroke suggestions for how you can more likely make a team work well that you are a part of. Now, let's talk about writing as a team. First of all, why would you be asked to write in a team? In a workplace context, sometimes a task that needs to be completed, a written task, is just too big for one person to complete. Or the timeline is too short. This may very well be what you're faced with. The task may not be too large, but you have a very short time to do it. And it's just too short a time for one person to be able to complete the task. In that case, a team would work on the task. Or another situation in which you would have a team writing something is if no one person within an organization has all the knowledge needed to complete the project. So you actually need more people with more kinds of knowledge and expertise working on the task in order to complete it. Or if the stakes are so high, if this is such an important and such a meaningful project that the company wants their best people to work on it, that they're going to look around for a number of people who have good skills and expertise that they can bring to the task, so they're going to want their best people, and that's more than one person, in order to fix whatever's wrong, to produce whatever needs to be produced. Or, and this is almost sort of the cynical reason, but it's a real thing, and that is if no one person wants to take full responsibility for whether the project is a success or a failure, then you bring a group of people together who will share responsibility one way or the other, for good or for bad. All right? So no one person is taking full responsibility for the success or the failure of the project. So those are some likely reasons in a workplace or in a company that you would have a team writing something. So if that's the why, let's talk about the how. How people write a document together. And we have several different models for doing this when you are asked to produce a text as a group. There are several different models that you can choose from depending on how you function together and what kinds of things you value. So let's look at these three different ways to write a document together. One way to do it is that within your group you can designate one person, one member of the group, who's going to do the main writing of the document. And then the other members of the group will provide feedback about what that one person produces. This is considered to be the most efficient way of producing a written document as a group. In other words, it will take the least time and the least number of resources to finish the job. All right. On the other hand, it is also the least collaborative way of approaching a group writing task. In other words, you're going to have the fewest opportunities for people to actually share in the production and to really have lots of ideas from lots of different people being put into place. All right. So most efficient and least collaborative. All right. So that's approach number one. Approach number two is the members of the team divide up the project into smaller tasks, and then each member works on one of those smaller tasks. So for instance, if you are writing a report, you might have 3 people, and one of them is going to write about the problem and why it's a problem. Another one would write about the possible solutions to the problem, and a third person would come up with the recommendations based on the work that the team has done. So you're breaking a big job into smaller pieces, and then each person in the group is taking responsibility for one of the smaller pieces. On one hand, this is a more collaborative approach. You have more people contributing more meaningful ideas and more specifically relevant input to the project. However, it's also a lot harder to coordinate when you have more than one person actually writing a piece of the overall task, because then somebody has to coordinate, put everything together. And so it's a lot tougher to put the pieces back together than it is to have one person doing the whole thing. Right? Right. So, number 3 approach. And that is where you actually have all the members of the group writing together simultaneously, discussing, responding to each other's ideas along the way. So the process of writing from the very beginning involves everybody writing something, everybody reading each other's writing, everybody commenting on each other's writing, everybody making decisions about which writing we should use, which writing we should not use, if there's changes that need to be made, what changes should be made. So it's really a highly collaborative writing process. You really have everybody actively engaged at the same level with thinking through and making decisions about the writing. So that's the definition of highly collaborative writing. However, it's also the most time-consuming way to do a writing project, because that kind of thinking and sharing and interacting takes time. So you need time to produce a document in that way. So those are the three big approaches that you can take, and your team decides which approach you are going to take. And you'll make that decision based on a lot of factors, based on how much time you have, based on your relative strengths in writing, based on what the person asking you to do the task wants. There are a lot of variables here, but one way or another, the team is going to come up with one of those approaches as the way to do this writing task. Once that decision has been made, then you start to work through the writing process, as we have looked at before, to plan, draft, revise, and complete the document that you're writing together. So what does that look like when a team of people are writing? We've looked at it from an individual perspective in the past, but now let's look at what that writing process looks like when a team is producing a document. First of all, it's just really important that all team members have input into that final document. No matter which of those approaches you take that we just discussed, you still want to make sure that all team members have had an opportunity to provide input, ideas, questions. Just make sure that everybody's voice is heard and that everybody feels like his or her voice is heard, because the overall product will be a lot stronger if everybody feels invested in it. So it's real important. That level of investment comes only when everybody feels like they've had input. Okay? So, what you want to do is, as a group, you want to discuss your understanding of the problem to be solved. We talked about that before. Have a shared understanding of the problem or the task to be done. You want to, as a group, make sure you all have the same understanding of what your writing purpose is, who you're writing to, and the context in which you're writing. You may actually want to write this stuff down and make sure that everybody has a copy of it, so that each person can always go back and be guided by remembering what's my purpose, who's my audience, and are there anything special things about the context here that I need to pay attention to. If in this conversation any members should disagree on anything, let them say so. Talk it out. Here's where that leader is going to play such an important role, to make sure that everybody feels like it's okay to say so if someone disagrees with someone else, and then has the opportunity with the group to talk it out and come to an understanding, come to a compromise, whatever that looks like. But if people disagree at this level, at this point, you better let people talk it out and come to an agreement. Because if you don't, eventually disagreements rear their ugly heads when you don't want them to, when you're in the middle of trying to get this product done. Then you don't want those disagreements to show up. As a team, again, through discussion and decision making, you decide on the format of the product you're going to produce, the organization and style of your writing, Everybody gets together and talks about what the plan document is going to look like before any individual starts drafting. All right. So again, that upfront team discussion so that everybody has a common shared understanding of what format we're using, how we're organizing, what kind of style of writing we're using in this document. Then the individuals can get to work. Also, before the individuals start writing, making those decisions about who's going to do what and when each piece of work will be due. There's your timeline. Your timeline is critically important for everybody to know what's due, when is it due. All right? Make yourselves aware of each other's work styles if you can, and make sure you talk about up front your own time commitments so that when you make your timeline, it's a reasonable timeline for everyone in the group. So if you know you can never meet on Thursday evenings because you have another commitment, you better say so now so that somebody doesn't schedule a meeting on a Thursday and you can't come. All right? Work it up front so it's not a problem later. That's always a good idea. Now, before anybody starts writing, as a group, talk about how you give each other constructive feedback on each other's writing. In other words, how can I talk to you about what I see in your writing so that your feelings won't get hurt? Understanding that our common goal is to produce a really high quality, well-written document. And if we believe that all of us have that goal, then I want to be able to give you honest feedback without you getting super defensive and hurt and angry. So let's talk right now, before people start writing, about how we can do that. How we can give each other constructive feedback without people's feelings getting hurt. Very, very important. And finally, before people start writing, build some flexibility into your overall process. Ask and answer some questions like, what if somebody's part is missing on the day that it's due? What if somebody doesn't come to a meeting on a day that his or her parts is due? How are we going to get the project completed if somebody disappears or somebody doesn't contribute what she or he promised to contribute? How do we get this done? Talk about that before it happens. All right, so a lot of talking, a lot of thinking, a lot of decision making before you ever write anything. So now we get to the actual composing of a draft. Here's where we make that decision about who's going to write what. Are we going to have the one person in the group who seems to be the best writer compose the entire draft? Or is everyone going to draft a section? Or are we all going to compose one draft altogether? If that's the case, especially, but actually in all of these cases, how are you going to share the drafts? And isn't it wonderful the technologies we have available to us now to share drafts so that everybody can always be working on a draft? Right? Whether you stick with hard copies or you use electronic media, and these days it's just amazing what electronic media offers us. But however you decide to do it, a very smart idea. Always label and date your draft. And that includes the file name if you're doing it electronically. Always label and date a draft so that everybody always knows which version she or he is working on. And you're always working on the same and most current draft. There's nothing more frustrating to be editing somebody's writing and then realizing that what you're editing was the draft previous to a more recent draft that that person just wrote. Ugh. All that work going down the drain. All that time gone to waste. So make sure that everything gets dated and labeled and everybody's working on the most current draft. All right. Okay, so you've done your planning, you've done your talking, your thinking, your decision making, you've started composing drafts. Now, how do we get to the revision process as a team? Again, if you remember when we talked about revision before, we talked about revision of a couple different kinds. First of all, we talked about revision of content, which means answering the question now as a group, does this document say what we want it to say? Are there any revisions we need to make so that it does send our message even better than it does now? And this is about going back to your planning, remember, where you think about what you wanted to say. You look at your notes, you look at your outlines, you look at your brainstorming, you look at your research, wherever you got your content from. That's where you go back to see if this says what we wanted it to say. Also remember, another way to get feedback from other people. So we could actually ask someone who's not in the group to read it over and tell us whether it says what we intended it to say. So we're revising for content, for meaning, for what the document says and the extent to which it says what we want it to say, and does so clearly and fully. All right? But then remember, there's another whole kind of revision that has to do with form and correctness. So we also, at this stage as a group, look at the organization of the document. Have we organized this in a way that makes sense for our purpose? Or would a different organization make the message clearer? That's where we have to decide whether or not our format works. What about the writing style? Now this is an especially challenging step if you have different people contributing to the actual draft. So different people are likely to have different writing styles, yet the overall document has to feel like it was written by one person. There has to be an overall style that requires, use of good standard written business English, but also needs to sound like one voice, one united voice. All right. So if you've chosen the route of having different people write pieces of a document, for instance, then someone is going to have to look it over and figure out how to make sure that that it sounds like there's one voice speaking, that the overall style feels like the same writing style. Okay? That you want it to flow. You don't want it to suddenly sound like somebody else started talking in the middle of a paper. So it's tricky. It can be done, and it's done all the time. That's what good editing does. So you just want to make sure that the overall style meets the requirements of standard written business English, even if you yourself might have said something differently. That's okay, as long as your message is getting through in a way that it sounds like a unified voice saying it. All right. So here, these are the kinds of things we're thinking about in terms of the content and the style. And when all the team members have talked about it and we were all satisfied that this says what we wanted to say in the way we wanted to say it, then one person, only one person in the group, makes changes to the document that the team has agreed on. So the team talks about it and makes decisions, but you just have one person now making the changes that the team just decided on. That way, you'll have that consistent writing style throughout the document. Right? That one voice united speaking. All right? So everybody makes decisions, one person makes the changes. And then, editing and proofreading. What you want is for at least one of your team members to check the whole document for correctness. Correct spelling, grammar, punctuation, and Not just grammar, spelling, punctuation, but also consistency throughout the document in things like how headings are formatted, how names are used, how numbers are used, right? So if one author wrote numbers out in words and another author wrote numbers in numerics, that's not okay. So somebody's going to have to go back and normalize that, standardize it, make sure all the numbers are written one way or the other. Okay? If, excuse me, if your first heading is a question, and your second heading is a question, and then your third heading is a statement, and your fourth heading is a statement, somebody's got to go back and make a decision. Or, well, the team can make the decision, but somebody has to go back and make the changes so that all the headings are in the same format. Either we're going to use questions for all our headings, or we're going to use statements for all our headings, but somebody has to standardize it. So that's what we're talking about, consistency. Consistency throughout a document so that the reader isn't jarred by a big change all of a sudden in the middle of a document. So you have one person going back and checking the whole document for that. Then have somebody run the document through a spelling and grammar checker. Notice I said to do that after you have one person actually eyeball it and look for any issues. Why? Because a spell check and grammar check can never be completely accurate as to what you wanted to have on that paper. Why? Because spell checkers don't have brains, and they don't have your brain. They do not know your intention. So if a spell check or a grammar checker changes a word because it's misspelled and you did not mean that word to be there, what are you going to do? You're stuck unless you actually look at it and make sure that the word is spelled correctly and is the word you wanted to use. So make sure somebody who's good at this kind of thing eyeballs the whole document first for corrections in spelling, grammar, punctuation, sentence structure, that sort of thing, before someone then runs the whole document through the spelling or grammar checker. And if any individual within the group makes changes at this point to the document, that person needs to be ready to explain to the rest of the team members why that change had to be made. Whenever an individual within a group decides to make a change that the whole group hasn't agreed on, at this point, at this late point in the process, you'd better explain to the rest of the team members why it was necessary to make that change. All right? So, just a few further hints about writing as a team, because this is a pretty intense process, as you have probably figured out by now, but it can be a really valuable and a really wonderful and exciting process too. So, just a few more big picture kinds of hints for how a group can work most effectively together to produce a written document of good, high quality. Always give yourself enough time. I know when you're taking a course, there's never enough time, and if you're taking other courses, they compete for your time. So I know in a school setting, this is hard, and it's also going to be hard in a work setting. Businesses never have enough time. You know, companies are always under the time crunch. So it never feels like there's enough time to do stuff that's important. And yet, it's critically important to produce a quality written document as a team. You've got to give yourselves enough time to do things like get to know each other a little and build some loyalty within yourselves, to discuss problems and find solutions. All right, if you say you don't have time to deal with it, you'll be sorry, because the problem is not going to go away because you didn't have time to deal with it. And what will end up happening is it'll pop up when you're in the middle of trying to finish the thing, and it'll derail you. So you better give yourself enough time to discuss problems and find solutions before they become significant obstacles to you getting your job done. And be sure that everyone agrees on a point before going on to the next thing. Even go around and have each person say, I agree, I agree, I agree. Once again, if you don't do that, silence does not mean assent. If someone does not say, I agree, you cannot assume that they agree. And if somebody doesn't say it and it's not addressed and they disagreed, then that, again, it's going to come up. It's going to show up when you're trying to get the job done. So make sure up front that everybody agrees on something before you go on to the next thing. And give yourself time to complete each stage of the writing process. Time to plan, time to draft, and time to revise. Remembering that collaboration, working with other people, takes longer than individual work. All right? So that timeline is a really critical factor here, and it needs to be honest and realistic so that you're giving yourself enough time to get all of those stages completed. Just some other sort of big picture hints. Be aware that different people have different ways of expressing themselves in writing. And that could show up in the drafts, which means somebody's going to have to look and see to what extent that's okay, or to what extent you need to standardize the language so that it sounds like that one unified voice. From an individual perspective, big hint to your success, be responsible. Be a responsible team member. Do what you say you'll do when you say you'll do it. That doesn't seem like a lot to ask, but often it is. And we have to take individual responsibility for that. You know, just do what you say you're going to do. Be fair and be good to your team members. You don't have to love each other, but you do have to be responsible to each other. Do what you say you'll do when you say you'll do it. And I guess I just want to say this again because it's so important. Don't assume agreement within a group. Make sure that all voices are heard. And I'm serious in saying you might want to do that very explicitly by asking each person individually to say, I agree to that, I agree to that. And make sure that everybody says that before you move on. All right? Good.